Detective Jake Thompson had seen just about everything in his 20 years wearing the badge. Drug busts, domestic calls, robberies, you name it, he'd been there. But nothing could have prepared him for what he found that cold Tuesday morning in March. The house looked normal from the outside. White paint peeling a little, small front yard with brown grass, toys scattered on the porch. Just another house in a neighborhood where folks minded their own business. But when Jake and his partner kicked down that front door, following up on a tip about illegal activities, what they discovered inside changed everything. 6 little girls. That's what stopped Jake dead in his tracks. 6 pairs of eyes staring back at him from the corner of a dirty living room. The oldest looked maybe 14, holding a baby who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. In between were 4 other girls, all huddled together like scared animals. The house was a mess. Empty food containers everywhere, broken furniture, windows covered with old blankets instead of curtains. The smell hit you right away, a mix of things you didn't want to think about too hard. This wasn't just poverty. This was neglect. "It's okay," Jake said softly, lowering his voice the way he'd learned to do with frightened kids. "We're here to help." The oldest girl stepped forward, putting herself between Jake and her sisters. Her chin was up, defiant, but he could see her hands shaking. "We don't need help," she said. "We take care of ourselves." That's when Jake noticed the details that would haunt him for weeks. The youngest girl was wearing a diaper that clearly hadn't been changed in hours. The 2 middle girls, who looked like twins, were so thin their clothes hung loose on their small frames. Another girl, maybe 8 years old, had bruises on her arms. And one more, probably 6, hadn't moved or made a sound since he walked in. Child. Services arrived within the hour. Jake watched as social worker after social worker tried to figure out what to do with 6 sisters who refused to be separated. He'd seen this before. Kids get split up, scattered to different homes, sometimes, never seeing each other again. "They're a package deal," the oldest girl told every adult who would listen. "You take all of us or none of us. But here's the thing about foster care that most people don't understand. Finding one home for 6 kids, that's like winning the lottery on Christmas morning. Most families can handle 1, maybe 2 kids. 6 is a whole different story, especially when those kids come with the kind of baggage these girls carried. Jake found himself coming back to check on them. First at the emergency shelter, then at the temporary placement that lasted exactly 3 days before the family called it quits. Then another placement and another. Each time something went wrong, the girls would act out or the families would realize they'd bitten off more than they could chew. "They're difficult," one foster mother told him. "The oldest one has anger issues. The twins barely speak. One of them destroyed my kitchen table during what they called a tantrum. Another one hasn't said a word since she got here. And the little one cries all night." Jake kept thinking about something his late wife used to say. Carmen had always wanted kids, but cancer took her before they got the chance. "Sometimes," she'd told him during one of her good days, "God puts people in your path not because you're ready for them, but because they need you to get ready." 3 months passed. 3 months of Jake watching these 6 sisters get shuffled from place to place, seeing the hope fade from their eyes a little more each time. The system was trying its best, but the reality was harsh. Nobody wanted 6 kids with problems. That's when Jake started thinking crazy thoughts. He'd go home to his empty house every night, eat dinner alone at a table that could seat 8, and think about those girls sleeping in another temporary placement. His house had 4 bedrooms upstairs, a big backyard, and way too much quiet. His partner Tom thought he'd lost his mind when Jake mentioned it. "6 kids, Jake. You're 50 years old. You've never even had 1 kid. And these aren't easy kids we're talking about." His captain was even less supportive. "Thompson, you're a good cop, but this is career suicide. You think you can handle 6 traumatized children and still do this job? Something's got to give, and I guarantee it won't be the kids." But Jake couldn't shake the image of those 6 girls, the way the oldest one tried to be brave while her world fell apart. How the twins held hands like they were afraid someone would separate them. The 8-year-old who lashed out because she didn't know how else to express her pain. The 6-year-old who'd gone silent, probably because talking had never kept her safe before, and the little one who still believed someone might actually take care of her. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon. Jake got a call from the current placement. The family wanted the girls out by Monday. They'd found permanent homes, but here's the catch. The girls would be split up. 2 here, 2 there, 1 somewhere else, and the oldest would go to a group home. Jake sat in his patrol car outside the house where the girls were staying, watching through the window as they played in the backyard. The oldest was pushing the youngest on an old swing set while the others took turns on a slide that had seen better days. They looked almost normal, almost happy. But he knew that in 3 days, this would end. They'd be separated, possibly forever. That night, Jake sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold and a stack of paperwork that would change everything. Foster care applications, background check forms, financial statements, references. He thought about Carmen, about the family they'd never had, about the empty rooms upstairs and the silence that filled his house every night. But mostly, he thought about 6 little girls who'd already lost everything and were about to lose each other too. By Monday morning, Jake had made his decision. He walked into the social services office with his completed paperwork and a determination that surprised even him. "I want to foster all 6 of them," he told the caseworker. She looked at him like he'd just said he wanted to adopt a pack of wolves. "Detective Thompson, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but 6 children is, well, it's unprecedented, especially for a single man with no experience." "Those girls have been through enough," Jake said. "They need stability, and they need to stay together. I've got the space, I've got the time, and I've got the commitment." What he didn't say was that he also had the fear. Fear that he was making the biggest mistake of his life. Fear that he wasn't good enough, strong enough, or patient enough for what lay ahead. But bigger than his fear was the certainty that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. 3 weeks later, Jake found himself standing in his driveway, watching a social services van pull up to his house. 6 small faces peered out the windows, about to start a new chapter in a story that none of them knew how to write yet. Jake's hands were shaking as he unlocked his front door that first day. 6 pairs of eyes watched him from the social worker's van, and he wondered what on earth he'd gotten himself into. His house had been quiet for 2 years since Carmen passed, and now it was about to become anything but quiet. The oldest girl stepped out first, still playing the role of protector. She looked around the neighborhood like she was planning an escape route. The twins came next, holding hands so tight their knuckles were white. Then the 8-year-old, who immediately kicked a rock across Jake's driveway with more force than necessary. The 6-year-old hung back and the youngest clung to her oldest sister's leg like a koala. "This is it," Jake said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "This is home." The first night was a disaster. Jake had prepared the bedrooms the best he could, but the girls refused to sleep apart. They all crowded into one room, making a nest of blankets and pillows on the floor. Every time Jake tried to separate them, the youngest would start crying, which set off a chain reaction. At 2 in the morning, Jake found himself sitting in his hallway outside their room, listening to whispered conversations and muffled sobs. He'd dealt with hostage situations that were easier than bedtime with 6 scared kids. The oldest girl, who everyone called B, made it clear from day 1 that she didn't trust him. She tested every rule, every boundary, every ounce of patience Jake had. When he said dinner was at 6, she'd disappear until 7. When he asked her to help with chores, she'd do them wrong on purpose. When he tried to talk to her, she'd give him looks that could melt steel. "You think you're some kind of hero?" she asked him one morning, arms crossed, attitude thick as maple syrup. "We've heard it all before. Nice house, nice guy, wants to help." Then something goes wrong and we're back in the system. Jake wanted to tell her he was different, that this was permanent, that they were safe now. But words didn't mean much to kids who'd been let down too many times. He was going to have to prove it. The twins, Lily and Rose, were like 2 halves of one person. They'd created their own language, a mix of whispers and gestures that nobody else could understand. They'd disappear for hours, and Jake would find them in the strangest places, under the porch, in the basement, once even in his bedroom closet. They moved like shadows, there one minute, gone the next. When they did speak English, it was only to each other, and only when they thought nobody was listening. Jake learned to do chores extra quietly just to catch bits of their conversations. They talked about our old life, about being hungry, about the scary man who used to live in their house. They talked about whether Jake would hurt them, whether they'd have to run away, whether anyone would ever really want them. The 8-year-old who went by Spark was pure energy wrapped in anger. She broke things, not on purpose exactly, but because she couldn't sit still, couldn't be gentle, couldn't turn down the volume on her emotions. In her first week, she put her fist through Jake's bathroom wall, broke 2 dinner plates, and somehow managed to jam the garbage disposal with a toy car. "I'm not trying to be bad," she told Jake after the garbage disposal incident, tears streaming down her face. Things happen when I get mad." The 6-year-old, called Button by her sisters, hadn't spoken a word since arriving. Not to Jake, not to her sisters, not to anyone. She communicated through nods and shakes of her head, and sometimes not even that. She'd just stare with those big, solemn eyes that seemed to hold way too much sadness for such a little kid. Jake tried everything he could think of. He read parenting books, watched YouTube videos, called every social worker who'd listen. He bought coloring books, puzzles, toys. Nothing worked. Button would accept food when he offered it, would go where he pointed. But she was like a little ghost drifting through his house. And then there was the youngest, Sunshine, who was 4 years old and afraid of everything. Loud noises sent her running. Sudden movements made her flinch. She wet the bed every single night, and Jake went through more sheets in those first few weeks than he'd used in years. Sunshine would wake up screaming from nightmares Jake could only imagine. He'd find her sitting up in bed, sobbing, and when he'd try to comfort her, she'd shrink away like she expected to be hit. It broke his heart into pieces every single time. The grocery bills were insane. 6 growing kids eat a lot, and these kids had been hungry for so long they hoarded food like squirrels preparing for winter. Jake would find crackers under beds, fruit in closets, entire sandwiches wrapped in paper towels and hidden in toy boxes. "It's okay," he kept telling them. "There's always going to be enough food, you don't have to hide it." But telling kids they're safe and having them believe it are 2 very different things. Work became impossible. Jake's captain had warned him, but he hadn't really understood what it meant until he was getting calls from school 3 times a week. B was skipping classes. Spark got in a fight on the playground. The twins weren't turning in homework. Button wouldn't participate in anything. "Maybe you should reconsider," his partner Tom said after Jake had to leave in the middle of a case to pick up Spark from the principal's office. There's no shame in admitting this is too much. Jake's fellow cops tried to be supportive, but he could see the looks, the whispered conversations that stopped when he walked into the room. Some of them thought he was crazy. Others felt sorry for him. A few even placed bets on how long he'd last. The breaking point came 3 months in. Jake had been up all night with Sunshine, who'd had a particularly bad nightmare. He was running on no sleep and way too much coffee when he got a call from the school. All 6 girls were in the office. There'd been an incident. When Jake arrived, he found his girls sitting in a row like suspects in a lineup. B had black eye. Spark was covered in dirt. The twins were holding hands so tight Jake worried about circulation. Button was crying silently, and Sunshine was trying to hide behind her biggest sister. There was a fight, the principal explained. Some older kids were picking on the younger ones, calling them names, saying things about the foster system. Your oldest daughter decided to handle the situation. Jake looked at B, sitting there with ice on her eye and her chin up in defiance. She'd fought for her sisters. She'd protected them the only way she knew how. That night, after they got home, after he'd cleaned B's eye and made sure everyone was okay, Jake sat in his living room surrounded by 6 scared kids and wondered if everyone was right. Maybe he wasn't cut out for this. Maybe love wasn't enough. Maybe good intentions couldn't fix the kind of damage these girls carried. But then Sunshine climbed into his lap, something she'd never done before. She curled up against his chest and whispered the first words she'd spoken to him. "Don't give up on us." Jake held her tight and made a promise to himself and to them. No matter how hard it got, no matter how many times he wanted to quit, he wouldn't give up. These girls had been given up on enough times. That wasn't going to happen again. Not on his watch. The first year was the hardest thing Jake had ever done. Harder than police academy, harder than losing Carmen, harder than anything he could have imagined. But somewhere in the chaos of broken dishes and sleepless nights and parent-teacher conferences, something beautiful was starting to grow. It was messy and imperfect and nothing like the family Jake had imagined, but it was theirs. Change doesn't happen overnight. Jake learned that the hard way during those first difficult months, but somewhere around the 6-month mark, tiny cracks started appearing in the walls these girls had built around their hearts. It started with the smallest things. Sunshine stopped flinching when Jake reached for the salt at dinner. Button made eye contact for a full 3 seconds when he asked if she wanted juice. The twins left their bedroom door cracked open instead of barricaded shut. These weren't big victories, but Jake was learning to celebrate the little ones. The first real breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Jake's ancient dog, Chester. The old golden retriever had been Carmen's companion, and after she died, Chester mostly slept on the porch and ignored everyone. But kids have a way of bringing out the best in old dogs. Sunshine was the first to approach Chester. Jake found her one afternoon sitting next to the dog, just talking to him like he was her best friend. She told Chester about her bad dreams, about missing her mom, about being scared Jake might change his mind about keeping them. Chester's a good listener, Jake said quietly, not wanting to interrupt but letting her know it was okay. He doesn't judge, Sunshine replied, stroking the dog's gray muzzle. And he stays. Within a week, all 6 girls had adopted Chester as their unofficial therapist. Button would whisper to him when words felt too scary to say out loud. The twins included him in their secret language sessions. Spark would run laps around the yard with him when her anger got too big for her body. Even Bee, who acted tough about everything, could be found scratching behind Chester's ears when she thought nobody was watching. Jake started paying attention to what each girl needed instead of trying to treat them all the same. Bee needed respect and responsibility, so he started asking her opinion on house rules and letting her help make decisions about her sisters. When she wanted to get a part-time job at 15, Jake helped her fill out applications instead of saying she was too young. "You trust me?" Bee asked one day after Jake let her take the twins to the library by herself. "I'm learning to," Jake said honestly. "But more important, I want you to learn to trust yourself." The twins needed predictability and safety, so Jake created routines they could count on. Breakfast at 7, lunch at noon, dinner at 6, stories before bed, no exceptions. He kept every promise, even the tiny ones like remembering to buy the specific brand of crackers they liked. One evening, Rose looked up from her homework and said, "Jake, will you still be here tomorrow?" "Every tomorrow I can give you," he replied, and something shifted in her expression like a door opening just a crack. Spark needed an outlet for all that energy and emotion, so Jake signed her up for martial arts classes. At first, she was skeptical. Fighting was something that got her in trouble, not something adults encouraged. But her instructor, a patient woman named Ms. Chen, understood kids like Spark. "Fighting and martial arts are different," Ms. Chen explained. "Fighting comes from anger and fear. Martial arts come from discipline and respect." Spark threw herself into karate like her life depended on it. She practiced forms in the backyard, meditated when her emotions got overwhelming, and slowly learned that she could be strong without being destructive. Button needed patience and gentleness, so Jake never pushed her to talk. Instead, he sat with her while she drew pictures. Always the same thing: a house with 6 windows, and a big dog in the yard. He learned to read her expressions, to understand her nods and shakes, to appreciate the moments when she chose to be near him. The day Button finally spoke was ordinary in every way except one. Jake was making pancakes on a Saturday morning and Button was sitting at the kitchen table with Chester at her feet. Jake flipped a pancake a little too enthusiastically, and it landed on the floor. "Chester's breakfast," Button said, so quietly. Jake almost thought he imagined it. He turned around slowly, not wanting to make a big deal out of it, but wanting her to know he heard her. "I think you're right," he said. "Chester looks pretty happy about it." And Button smiled. Actually smiled. Sunshine needed to feel safe and loved, so Jake made sure she knew she could come to him any time, day or night. When she had nightmares, he'd sit by her bed until she fell back asleep. When she was scared of the dark, he bought her a nightlight shaped like a moon. When she wanted to learn to ride a bike, he spent hours running alongside her, holding the seat until she was ready to let go. The breakthrough moment for Sunshine came during a thunderstorm. She'd always been terrified of loud noises, and this storm was particularly fierce. Jake found her hiding under her bed, shaking with fear. "Can I tell you a secret?" Jake said, lying down on the floor so he could see her. "I used to be scared of storms too when I was little." "Really?" Sunshine whispered. "Really. My dad told me something that helped. He said storms are just the sky's way of cleaning itself, getting ready for sunshine." "Is that true?" "True enough," Jake said. "Want to watch it together?" They spent the next hour sitting by the window, watching lightning illuminate the sky, counting the seconds between thunderclaps. By the end of the storm, Sunshine was more fascinated than frightened. Christmas of their first year together was when everything clicked into place. Jake had worried about it for weeks. These girls had probably never had a real Christmas, and he wanted it to be special without being overwhelming. He bought thoughtful gifts, nothing too expensive or flashy. Art supplies for the twins who'd started drawing together, new martial arts gear for Spark, books for Button, who loved to read even if she wouldn't talk about them, a bike for Sunshine, and for Bee, something that made her cry, a locket with a picture of all 6 sisters inside. But the real gift came from them. On Christmas morning, after all the presents were opened and the wrapping paper cleaned up, Bee stood up and cleared her throat. "We made something for you," she said, pulling out a wooden picture frame that looked like it had been made in shop class. Inside was a photo one of the neighbors had taken without Jake knowing, all 7 of them in the backyard, Chester included, looking like an actual family. But it was the words carved into the frame that made Jake's eyes water. "To the best dad we never thought we'd have. You're our family now," Sunshine added, climbing into Jake's lap. "For real and forever." One by one, the other girls joined the hug, even Bee, who usually acted too cool for group hugs. For the first time in months, Jake wasn't worried about whether he was doing enough or whether the girls were healing, or whether any of this was working. He was just grateful. Grateful for second chances and unexpected families, and the way love can grow in the most unlikely places. Grateful for 6 girls who'd taught him that being a father wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up. Every day, even when you had no idea what you were doing. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, Jake sat in his living room looking at their Christmas photo. His house was louder now, messier, more chaotic than he'd ever imagined. There were shoes by the front door, backpacks on the kitchen counter, and Chester's dog hair on everything. It was perfect. The walls the girls had built around their hearts weren't completely down yet, but they were full of doors now, doors that opened a little more each day. And Jake was learning that family isn't something you're born into. It's something you choose, something you build, something you fight for every single day. They still had hard days ahead of them, but they'd face them together. All 7 of them, plus one very wise old dog who'd somehow become the heart of their unlikely family. Years passed in what felt like both slow motion and fast forward. Jake watched his girls grow from broken children into strong young women, and somehow, without him realizing it, his house had become the heart of the neighborhood. Bee blossomed into a natural leader. At 18, she was student council president, captain of the debate team, and had colleges fighting over her with scholarship offers. But more than that, she'd become Jake's partner in raising her sisters. When one of the twins had trouble with math, Bee tutored her for hours. When Spark got suspended for defending a younger kid from bullies, Bee talked to the principal and got the suspension reduced. "You don't have to take care of everyone," Jake told her one evening as she helped Sunshine with a school project while simultaneously reviewing college applications. Yes, I do, B said without looking up. That's what family does. You taught me that. Jake had to step outside for a minute because sometimes the pride he felt for these girls was too big for his chest to hold. The twins, Lily and Rose, discovered they had incredible artistic talents. Lily could paint things that made people stop and stare, capturing emotions on canvas like she was magic. Rose could play piano like she was born with music in her fingers. They still had their secret language, but now they included everyone in their creative world. Their art teacher, Mrs. Garcia, pulled Jake aside at a parent conference. "I've been teaching for 25 years, she said, and I've never seen raw talent like this. These girls could go anywhere, do anything. But the best part wasn't their talent, it was watching them share it. They taught art classes for younger kids at the community center. They performed at nursing homes and made elderly faces light up with their music and paintings. They'd learned that gifts are meant to be given away. Spark channeled all that energy into becoming a force of nature in the best possible way. She earned her black belt in karate, became captain of the track team, and graduated as valedictorian of her class. But what made Jake proudest was how she used her strength to protect others. When a new foster kid started at their school and was getting picked on, Spark became his protector. Not with her fists, she learned better ways to fight. She organized a buddy system, talked to teachers, and made sure no kid had to face bullies alone. "Remember when you used to solve everything with anger?" Jake asked her after she'd spent a Saturday helping younger kids with their homework. "I still get angry," Spark admitted, "but now I use it for good things. Anger at injustice, anger at people being cruel, anger at problems that need fixing. You taught me that being strong means lifting others up, not tearing them down." Button found her voice in the most beautiful way. She became the editor of the school newspaper, writing articles that made people think and feel. Her words had power because they came from someone who understood what it meant to have no voice at all. She wrote about foster care, about kids who fall through the cracks, about the importance of listening to people who can't speak for themselves. Her articles were reprinted in other newspapers, and she won awards for journalism that Jake proudly displayed on the refrigerator next to finger paintings and report cards. "I was quiet for so long because I thought my words didn't matter," Button told Jake when she won her first writing contest. "But you waited for me to find them, and now I know they matter a lot." Sunshine grew into the happiest kid Jake had ever known. She brought laughter wherever she went, made friends with everyone from the mailman to the grocery store cashier, and had a smile that could cure sadness. But she never forgot where she came from or how precious safety felt. She volunteered at the animal shelter, started a program to read to scared animals, and wanted to become a veterinarian so she could help creatures who couldn't help themselves. Her compassion was like sunshine. It touched everything around her and made it grow. Jake adapted his work life to be the dad these girls deserved. He became a school resource officer, which meant he was closer to home and could be at every soccer game, piano recital, art show, and graduation. His fellow officers teased him about going soft, but Jake didn't care. He'd found his calling, and it wasn't just about being a cop anymore. The girls started calling him Dad naturally, without fanfare or formal announcements. It happened gradually, one girl at a time, until one day Jake realized he couldn't remember the last time any of them had called him by his first name. When B turned 18, he officially adopted all 6 girls, making their family legal as well as real. The neighborhood had embraced them completely. Mrs. Johnson, next door, always had extra cookies for growing teenagers. Mr. Peterson across the street taught the twins how to change oil in his garage. The Martinez family, 3 houses down, included them in every backyard barbecue and holiday celebration. "You've got something special here," Mrs. Johnson told Jake one evening as they watched all 6 girls playing volleyball in the backyard with kids from around the neighborhood. "These girls are going to change the world." Jake's house became the place where all the kids wanted to hang out. Not because he was the cool dad. Jake was definitely not cool, but because it felt safe. Kids knew they could come here if they needed help, if things were rough at home, if they just needed someone to listen. He lost count of how many teenagers had sat at his kitchen table over the years, eating leftover pizza and talking through problems. His girls had learned to share their dad with other kids who needed him, understanding that love multiplies instead of divides. The really amazing thing was watching his daughters support each other through everything. When Bea was stressed about college applications, her sisters formed a study group to help her focus. When one of the twins was nervous about her first piano recital, the whole family showed up wearing matching t-shirts that said, "Rose's biggest fans." When Button had to interview the mayor for the school newspaper and was terrified, Spark offered to come along as moral support. When Sunshine was worried about starting high school, Bea spent the whole summer showing her around the building and introducing her to friendly teachers. They fought sometimes, like all siblings do. There were arguments over borrowing clothes, disagreements about movie choices, and the occasional slam of a bedroom door. But underneath it all was something unbreakable, the knowledge that they'd chose each other, that they'd stick together no matter what. Jake started getting calls from social workers asking for advice about other difficult placements. Could he talk to this family? Could he share what worked? His story spread through the foster care system, giving hope to other families who were struggling. The secret, he'd tell them, isn't having all the answers. It's showing up every day, even when you don't know what you're doing. Kids don't need perfect parents. They need present ones. By the time his oldest girls were graduating high school, Jake's quiet house had become a hub of activity, achievement, and love. College acceptance letters covered the refrigerator. Scholarship offers piled up on the kitchen counter. Awards and certificates filled a whole wall in the hallway. But the thing that made Jake proudest wasn't the achievements. It was watching his daughters become women who cared about others, who used their strengths to help people, who'd learned that family isn't about blood but about choice and commitment and never giving up on each other. As Jake sat on his porch one evening, watching Chester play with the newest litter of neighborhood kittens while his daughters planned their futures, he thought about that scared cop who'd walked into a dirty house 15 years ago and found 6 broken little girls. He'd thought he was saving them, but the truth was simpler and more beautiful than that. They'd all saved each other. 15 years had passed since Jake first brought 6 scared little girls home to his quiet house. Now at 58, he was the proud father of 6 incredible women who'd exceeded every dream he'd ever dared to have for them. But life has a way of testing you when you least expect it. It was a Tuesday morning in October when everything changed. Jake was working his usual shift as a school resource officer, helping kids with problems that seemed so small compared to what his own daughters had overcome. He'd just finished talking to a 7th grader about bullying when the call came over. His radio. All units, domestic disturbance on Maple Street, possible weapon involved. Jake knew that address. It was 3 blocks from the school in a neighborhood where he'd answered calls before. He radioed that he was responding and headed out thinking, it would be another routine call in a career full of them. But routine calls can turn dangerous in seconds. When Jake arrived at the house, he found a situation spiraling out of control. A man, clearly under the influence, was threatening his family with a gun. Jake tried everything he'd learned in 23 years of police work, talking, negotiating, de-escalating. "Sir, let's just talk about this," Jake said, his hands visible, his voice calm. "Nobody needs to get hurt here." For a moment, it seemed like it might work. The man lowered the weapon slightly, looked confused like he was waking up from a bad dream. But then something shifted, and he raised the gun again. Jake had milliseconds to make a choice. The man was pointing the weapon toward a window where Jake could see children's faces. There was no time to think, only time to act. Jake moved to put himself between the gun and those kids. The shot echoed through the quiet neighborhood. When backup arrived, they found Jake on the ground, bleeding from a chest wound, but still conscious enough to tell them the children were safe. The paramedics worked frantically as neighbors gathered, many of them people who knew Jake, who'd watched him raise his 6 daughters, who'd seen him at every school event and community gathering for 15 years. At the hospital, doctors worked for hours to save Jake's life. The bullet had missed his heart by inches, but the damage was severe. He'd need multiple surgeries, months of recovery, and even then, there were no guarantees about what his future would look like. His daughters dropped everything and came running. Bea drove straight from her law office, still wearing her court suit. Lily and Rose caught the first flight from art school in New York. Spark left her job at the physical therapy clinic and drove through the night. Button abandoned her newspaper deadline, and Sunshine walked out of her pre-med classes without a word to anyone. For 3 days, they took turns sitting by Jake's hospital bed, holding his hand, talking to him even when he couldn't respond. They told him about their lives, their dreams, their plans. They reminded him of every good memory they'd shared, every lesson he'd taught them, every moment that had made them a family. "You can't leave us," Bea whispered during one of her late-night vigils. "We're just getting started. You haven't walked me down the aisle yet, and you promised you'd be there when I graduate law school." When Jake finally woke up a week later, the first thing he saw was 6 worried faces surrounding his bed. The relief in their eyes was so bright it almost hurt to look at. "Did I miss anything important?" Jake asked, his voice rough from the breathing tube. "Just us being terrified we were going to lose the best dad in the world," Sunshine said, tears streaming down her face. The recovery was harder than anyone expected. Jake needed 3 surgeries, and the medical bills started piling up like snowdrifts. His police disability covered some of it, but not nearly enough. Physical therapy, medications, home modifications. The costs were overwhelming. Jake tried to hide his worry from his daughters, but they knew him too well. They could see the stress in his eyes, the way he'd stop talking when medical bills arrived in the mail, the way he'd sit at his kitchen table late at night with a calculator and a stack of papers. "I might have to sell the house," Jake finally admitted to Bea one evening when she came to visit. "The medical bills are just too much." "Dad, no," Bea said firmly. "This house is our home. All our memories are here. We'll figure something out." But Jake shook his head. "You girls have your own lives now, your own expenses. I won't be a burden to anyone." What Jake didn't know was that his daughters had been meeting in secret, planning something that would change everything. They'd learned from him that when someone you love is in trouble, you don't just sit around feeling helpless. You take action. Bea used her legal connections to research grants and fundraising options. Lily organized an art auction, donating her most valuable paintings and convincing other artists to contribute. Rose arranged benefit concerts, bringing together musicians from across the city. Spark organized a community fun run, getting sponsors from local businesses. Button wrote an article about Jake's story that went viral, bringing attention from people across the country who'd been touched by stories of foster care and family. Sunshine organized medical supply drives and convinced her pre-med professors to help with fundraising events. But their biggest surprise was still to come. 3 months after Jake was released from the hospital, still recovering but finally able to walk without assistance, his daughters asked him to come to the community center for what they said was a small thank you gathering for all the people who'd helped during his recovery. Jake reluctantly agreed, expecting maybe 30 or 40 neighbors and friends. Instead, when he walked into the community center, he found hundreds of people, fellow officers, teachers, neighbors, kids he'd helped over the years, families from around the city. "What is all this?" Jake asked, overwhelmed by the crowd. Took the microphone and smiled at her father. "Dad, 15 years ago, you saw 6 kids that nobody wanted and decided to love us anyway. You taught us that family isn't about blood. It's about choice, commitment, and never giving up on each other." She gestured to her sisters, who joined her on the small stage. "You gave us everything, a home, an education, love, support, and, most importantly, you gave us each other. Tonight we want to give something back." Behind them, a large banner was unveiled that read, "The Jake Thompson Family Foundation, supporting foster children and the families who love them." "We've raised enough money to not only cover all your medical expenses," Rose announced, "but to start a foundation that will help other foster families stay together." Lily stepped forward. "Our first project is building a group home where sibling groups can stay together while waiting for permanent placement. No more splitting up brothers and sisters." Spark took the microphone next. "We're also funding emergency assistance for foster families facing financial crises, so other dads like you won't have to choose between their health and their home." Button spoke about the scholarship program they'd established for kids aging out of foster care. Sunshine announced the partnership with local colleges to provide mental health services for foster children. But most importantly, Bee said, her voice thick with emotion, we wanted everyone to know that the 6 scared little girls you brought home 15 years ago are now 6 women who are going to spend the rest of our lives making sure other kids get the same chance we got. Jake stood there, surrounded by the community that had embraced his unconventional family, looking at his 6 daughters who'd become forces for good in the world, and he couldn't speak. The pride, the love, the sheer amazement at how far they'd all come. It was too much for words. You didn't save us, Dad, Bee said softly, stepping down from the stage to hug him. We saved each other. As Jake looked around the room at hundreds of faces, people whose lives had been touched by his family's story, he realized something beautiful. Love really does multiply. The love he'd given to 6 little girls had grown and spread and touched more lives than he could have ever imagined. That night, as they drove home together, all 7 of them plus Chester, who was now